morning.
Good morning, Lisa. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for being with us. Now, offshore wind energy has a huge potential in Europe and elsewhere, but is also facing a lot of hurdles and challenges.
Yeah, thank you so much all for being here, and thank you for the very inspirational opening by the minister. And I think that shows that France is a key country for the offshore wind sector, and that's why we are here as RWE as well. First of all, I think we need to look at offshore wind in the energy trilemma of ensuring that we have a reliable and affordable and a sustainable energy landscape. And for me, offshore wind really ticks all the boxes in that. So as a first, to name those 3 points, the first thing I would think about is simply the opportunity of the huge build-out targets that we have. So already last year, the North Sea countries came together in Esbjerg, and I think this year it was really great to see other European countries like the UK and Ireland, but especially also France being added to that group. And if you add it up, all the countries in Europe already by 2030 want to realize 165 gigawatt in the water. That's simply mind-blowing. For us as RWE, we're the second largest company with installed capacity at the moment. We need to triple our capacity by 2030 to get to 8 gigawatts of installed capacity. But holistically, it means that going from 2.2 gigawatt in 2022 installed, we will need to install 20 gigawatt per year around 2030. That is an enormous challenge, but also an opportunity for all of us. It will keep us all busy for many years to come. To do that, we also need to think about the second point, the affordability. And what we have seen, there are major challenges at the moment in the supply chain. We have had a very good, successful run on the installation, on bringing down the levelized cost of energy. We're now a very solid, reliable technology that we can also afford. But at the moment, there's a shortage of almost everything. There's a shortage of equipment, there's a shortage of material, and not in the least, there's a shortage of skilled people to do these installations. And that's really something we have to think about as a whole sector, but also with political players to think, how will we do that so the costs will remain manageable, the supply-demand balance isn't completely off, and we can actually make successful investment decisions again. Looking at that, I would come to the third point of the energy trilemma, and that's actually the sustainability. Many of us might think we're doing offshore wind, it's renewable, it's green, so we're there, right? But that's not where we believe it ends. You have to think about sustainability also in the way you engage your supply chain. We've recently signed, for instance, also new international responsible business conduct agreements, many countries, and that's what we really look for to see in the supply chain when it comes worldwide, when we source, that human rights, that conditions, that labor conditions are well around the world. Also something where I think we can take a big example from France. And then also to look at the biodiversity. So we obviously have an impact of our wind farms, both above as well as below the water. And as RWE, we set ourselves the target to make sure that by 2030, our assets actually have a net zero effect on that biodiversity. But that in itself is a huge challenge, and we will need the engagement of all of us. I think we should look at biodiversity like we look at HSSE. We should share data, we should share know-how, we should share successes, because it's a responsibility of all of us that we make that happen. When we bring all this together, I'm really convinced that offshore wind is the key for this energy dilemma, or trilemma, I should say. So we will have a reliable, an affordable, and a sustainable energy landscape from it.
And in all that, on all this, where do you see France in this offshore world? What place will the country take?
Well, RWE is a very international company. So we're active around the globe. I have colleagues in the US with first successes in offshore wind, in APAC. Of course, we have a very strong European heart. I'm responsible for continental Europe myself. That means from the Netherlands and France, they are really my core markets. And I think France has all the capabilities and all the factors there to be a very attractive investment for foreign investors. The simple targets, the minister was just alluding to them again, 14 gigawatts by 2035, building up to 40 gigawatts by 2050. That alone is enough to attract any foreign investor. But France then needs to think about, how do I really, so I've attracted these foreign investors, but how do I get them to stay? And in that sense, I would like to name now the speed that we are moving. And then, yeah, it's maybe not very nice to say in this room, to say we have these big targets. We also have these numbers of tenders already there. We can easily name our 4, our 5, our 6, our 7, but in reality, we've only just awarded tender number 4. So we have so much to do to get to that level. And the speed, I think the minister was also alluding to that, that will be essential now for those foreign investors to also stay here. So first of all, to have a really stable outlook for the volume to come. When will it be auctioned? How will it be auctioned? We think it should actually be done in larger gigawatt tranches, and we know in advance every other year that such a tender would come, technology agnostic, making sure we don't concentrate everything with only a small amount of players. But secondly, once we have this stable roadmap, also to think about how can we actually shorten the time between the tender award and the actual installation. Because that, at the moment in France, is actually quite an anomaly. It's such a long period that for a foreign investor, it's really difficult to think, okay, I get awarded a site now, but all the steps I have to take, it will only be in the water by 2032. The amount of uncertainty you have in that, you have to price that into your tenders and into the risk that you're willing to take. So I think it's very good that this is now in the French law, that we need to shorten this time, that we need to invest in studies up front, that we need a clear roadmap with RTE together to do the necessary investments in the grid already up front. If we also work then with the ports, I'm really sure we can shorten this time and we can make sure that these foreign investors are very interested to stay. We as RWE, we're here for the long term. We also have a position in onshore wind and PV. We will not go anywhere fast, but we want a big competitive landscape with many players interested to make an attractive market in the end.
You just said it, France is still somehow at the beginning of all this development, and yet is there something the world can learn from France, obviously not only when it comes to wine and cheese, but to offshore wind energy?
Well, first of all, I think France is really unique in its combination of fixed bottom and floating wind. So if I look at the future volumes, it will kind of be 50-50. And that combination of immediately spreading the know-how, getting it from fixed bottom to floating wind, I think it will really be an example for, in each case, the south of Europe, but floating will also be very interesting for countries in APAC, for California and all that. So that for sure will be something. If I look at the tenders itself, I would really say the system that there is very robust. I said this to the minister also this morning. The two-sided CFD with an indexation is a really good tool to give this certainty to investors. To really say, you can be here, even if you still have to do all these development steps, you know what you will get for that. I think that is really something to cherish, that we should all build on further. On a side note, changing the topic a little bit, what I would like to say as well, France can really do it. France can do these transitions. If I look at the train landscape, if I look at the full industry that you have for TGVs, if I compare that with the rest of Europe, France can really show that it can do different type of transitions really fast in an orchestrated way. And that is really examples we need to cherish as Europe as a whole.
You just mentioned floating offshore wind energy. Now, floating offshore wind energy has been the next big thing for quite a while. Do you think now is the time when it finally will kick off?
Well, I think we have a date for Bretagne Sud now for the tender submission, so that is very important because that will really be the first milestone. We as a company, we're ready for floating wind. We want, actually in 2030, already 1 gigawatt of our installation in the water be from floating wind. And we can do that. Honestly, 70% is similar as to what we need for fixed bottom, so we can really build on that. There's these last challenges that we need to solve. They're not minor. It's about the industrialization, working with the ports. Also here, the support schemes from France are very necessary. Really making sure there's now this industrialization. We think about the installation, but not only that. We think immediately also about the operations and maintenance phase, because that will be key for floating wind, to make sure that we actually need less maintenance, that we don't every time something happens, a major component, we need to tow the full installation back to port. That will really be key and essential, this industrialization, to now make sure we stop talking about floating wind as the next big thing, but it actually becomes the next big thing. Because building on that, I actually think we already have to think beyond, and we have to think about new innovations. So what we are also thinking about, for instance, is floating PV. Thinking about how do we use that space even better? How can we have between the wind farms, or maybe on a standalone basis in the Mediterranean, whether it's less less wind conditions, that we can also install these solar panels that have proven themselves inland on lakes already, but we believe they can also go offshore. And we have good, for instance, at our recent tender that we won in the Netherlands for Hollandse Kust West, where we already will prove that. And if you can do floating PV on the North Sea, we believe you can do it everywhere. And those steps for innovation are really key, because the final innovation I would like to mention, which I haven't heard here much yet, is then to move this all to hydrogen, actually. And you say floating has been the next big thing for a long time. Well, we have heard that hydrogen will be the energy carrier of the future, and it always will be. Well, I think it's our responsibility to make sure that hydrogen actually becomes core. Because once we have built out all these targets, once we have the 18 gigawatt in the water here, and then moving to the 40 gigawatt, we will reach the limits of what we can actually directly electrify. Plus, at the same time, already in parallel, we are at the moment constrained by the grid. We're constrained by the build-out that RTA can do. So we believe if you immediately start with the hydrogen economy, ensure that there is on land enough demand, enough industrial players in the hard-to-abate sectors that can use that hydrogen, and at the same time, even produce some of the hydrogen directly offshore and transport it back to the land, you will then really have a complete landscape in which we can even greenify our economy faster.
Thank you. All these topics will be discussed, obviously, in other panels here on stage today and tomorrow. Thank you very much, Renske YTSMA from RW Renewables.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you.